Once again, we're in the book of Job. What do? How do you respond wisely to somebody when you feel that you've been falsely accused? Anybody in here ever been falsely accused over something in your life? A lot of people are falsely accused in this world, and that's one of the things we're going to concentrate on tonight from the book of Job. How do we respond? How are each of us as Christians to respond wisely and biblically when we are falsely accused? One of the most treacherous enemies, I believe, that is not only in the church today, but in the world today is the tongue. The tongue. You see that in the news media all the time, don't we? We see all of the things that are said, and sometimes it's hard to sift and to know what's true and what isn't true, and who's being accused of this and who's being accused of that. And the human tongue, I believe, has done more damage and caused more troubles and heartaches for people than probably any other source of trouble. What we say cuts far deeper than any knife or any sword. In fact, we read this in the Ten Commandments in the book of Exodus, chapter 20 and verse 16. We read in the law of Moses, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Now, when Solomon penned the Proverbs, he included the 7 things the Lord hates found in Proverbs chapter 6. And in verse 19, one of them is a false witness who utters lies. It's hard sometimes to convince people otherwise that you're innocent when you have heard lies that can be so convincing. Life and death, according to the Bible, are in the power of the tongue. And tragically, churches can be feeding grounds for loose lips and lying tongues. I want you to think about that. I've heard that down through the years, haven't you? A lot of people will say, well, I just don't want to go to church there, or I just don't want to go to church anymore because there are too many loose lips around. Let me give you some biblical characters that were falsely accused in the Bible. First of all, Joseph. When you think about Joseph over there in the Old Testament, he had to learn a new language. Joseph, you will remember, his brothers sold him into slavery, and he was taken down there to Potiphar's house. He had to become acquainted with a different culture than what he knew, a different language than what he knew. He earned his way to a place of great responsibility as the manager of Potiphar's belongings. He was a model person of integrity, but Joseph was falsely accused of rape by Potiphar's wife. He wound up in jail. For many, many years he was there. How unfair is that? What about Moses, faithful even at the age of 80 years to obey God's voice and to accept God's call, his commission from the burning bush to go back to Egypt and to deliver God's people from Egyptian bondage, and following the Exodus while still wandering across the wilderness? Those people that Moses had delivered turned on him, and they falsely accused him of bringing them into that wilderness to watch them die. But it was because of their sin against God that they wound up in that wilderness. And nothing was further from the truth than what they had accused Moses of. Or what about King David after killing the giant as a young kid and demonstrating a life of courage and integrity? He's falsely accused of trying to dethrone King Saul by the jealous and secure King Saul himself. David became a fugitive. He was on the run for at least a dozen or more years in his life. He was falsely accused of something that was not true. How undeserving of David's false accusations against him. What about Nehemiah? He rebuilt the wall around ancient Jerusalem, having motivated the people to accomplish that difficult task. And before the project reached completion, several of his enemies spread the word that Nehemiah had an ulterior motive for what he did. They said he's building the wall so that he can ultimately become the new king. Nehemiah is in it for himself. That was their lie against him. How unfair for that to be said of a godly and a diligent Nehemiah. What about Peter and John, accused falsely of preaching about a false Christ? It was clearly a false accusation. Unfairly, they were beaten for the false allegations against them. What about the Apostle Paul? Paul himself was accused of being a phony convert just shortly after his conversion. If you will remember, Jesus' apostles wouldn't even let Paul in their inner circle since they were suspicious about him and they could not fathom that he could be born again. Later accused of causing a dissension among all the Jews. And later, Paul was accused by Governor Festus of being insane because of his great learning. How unfair was that? And then we come to Jesus, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Much spawned false accusations about him. The trials before the crucifixion, way into the night, all of the false allegations against Jesus. From his earliest months in his public ministry, he was accused of being of illegitimate birth because of Mary. During his time of ministry, Jesus was accused even of being a drunkard because he sat and ate with sinners. The Pharisees also accused Jesus one time there of being demon-possessed, an instrument of Satan, because Jesus healed people. Ultimately, Jesus, of course, went to the cross due to the false allegations against him of blasphemy and tyranny. Talk about unfair. Life is unfair, isn't it? Let me tell you, I hear people say all the time how very unfair life seems to be, and you know what, I have to go back and say yes, but the Bible says that it rains on the just as well as the unjust. The rains that fell last night fell upon the just of this world as well as the unjust. And so we're not surprised when Jesus began to deliver that immortal sermon on the Mount that he included these words in Matthew chapter 5, verses 11 through 12. He said, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." If you're being falsely accused tonight, welcome to the club who have been falsely accused down through the years. I cannot help but think, if any of you ever watched some of the Dateline, NBC, 2020, ID, all of those different shows that are on television, where many times people that are in prison and have been there for years, even some of them have been falsely accused because of the accusations against them. Don't miss the promise there in Matthew 5, 11 and 12. Don't miss this promise where Jesus said, your heavenly reward will be great. Tonight we come once again to Job chapter 20, verse 1 through 3. Zophar now is going to speak. Remember the three friends, there's Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz. Now then Zophar the Naamathite answered, "Therefore," he says in verse 2, "my disquieting thoughts make me respond, even because of my inward agitation." He said, "I listened to the reproof which insults me, and the spirit of my understanding makes me answer." Now Zophar is saying, I've got some disquieting thoughts, Job. I have an inward agitation tonight because of what you have said. Now, what agitated Zophar is that Job simply voiced his disagreements with his friend. Zophar, like so many people in this world, they don't want to listen. He wanted to talk. He didn't want to listen. He wanted to instruct. Preferably, he, along with his other friends, they want to lecture, and he certainly didn't want to be disagreed with. And that's like so many people in the world today. Don't we all think that we're right? Hello? Are y'all out there tonight? Don't we pretty much think we're right? And when we voice our opinion, we're always right, and we don't want to listen. And so Zophar, he's agitated. Zophar is, he says, disquieting thoughts. Job has spoken. And so he comes back. And Zophar's tongue of acid has three messages that he wants to say to Job. He says each one, and as he says these he exaggerates them. First of all, he wants Job to understand in verses 4 through 11 that the wicked do not live long. That's basically what those verses 4 through 11 will talk about. Do you know this form of old from the establishment of man on earth? And then he goes on in verse 5 that the triumphing of the wicked is short and the joy of the godless momentary. Though his loftiness reaches the heavens and his head touches the clouds, he perishes forever like his refuse. Those who have seen him will say, "Where is he?" He flies away like a dream, and they cannot find him. Even like a vision of the night, he's chased away. The eye which saw him sees him no longer, and his place no longer beholds him. And his sons favor the poor, and his hands give back his wealth. And then he goes on and he says, his bones are full of his youthful vigor, but it lies down with him in the dust. And so the first thing that Zophar comes at Job with is this message to say to Job, the wicked don't live long. Remember what Job's friends have accused him of. They've said, Job, basically they have said this. Let me just sort of paraphrase it. They basically said, Job, you wouldn't be in the mess you're in tonight. You wouldn't have lost everything that you've lost, from your health to your children, to your wealth, to your servants, to your integrity as a man of the East, unless there is something hidden in your life that is sinful that you have not confessed. And so they ramble back and forth, and they go through all of this convolution of accusations against Job, and they feel that they are the authority. The only problem is they are speaking to the wrong person. Their motivation certainly is not accurate. It's not true. It's not filled with the integrity of what is truth. And so in verses 4 through 11, Zophar is saying basically that the wicked do not live long. Second, his message to Job in verses 12 through 19, he speaks about the pleasures of the wicked are temporary. Notice in verse 12 to 19, though evil is sweet in his mouth, and he hides it under his tongue, though he desires it and will not let it go, but holds it in his mouth, yet his food in his stomach is changed to the venom of cobras within him. He swallows riches, but will vomit them up. God will expel them from his body. And so he speaks in verse 16 through 19, he sucks the poison of cobras, the viper's tongue slays him. He does not look at the streams, the rivers flowing with honey and curds. He returns what he has attained and cannot swallow it. As to the riches of his trading, he cannot even enjoy them, for he has oppressed and forsaken the poor. He seized the house which he has not built. And so the first thing that Zophar accuses Job in this message is the wicked do not live long. Secondly, the pleasures of the wicked are temporal. And then thirdly, in verses 20 all the way to 29, he affirms God's judgment falls hard on the wicked. Because he knew no quiet within him, he does not retain anything he desires. He says in verse 21, nothing remains for him to devour, therefore his prosperity does not endure. In the fullness of his plenty he will be cramped. The hand of everyone who suffers will come against him. When he fills his belly, God will send his fierce anger on him and will rain it on him while he is eating. He may flee from the iron weapon, but the bronze bow will pierce him. It is drawn forth and comes out of his back, even the glittering point from his gall. Terrors come upon him. Complete darkness is held in reserve for his treasures, and unfanned fire will devour him. It will consume the survivor in his tent. The heavens will reveal his iniquity, and the earth will rise up against him. The increase of his house will depart. His possessions will flow away in the day of his anger. This is the wicked man's portion from God, even the heritage decreed to him by God. And so Zophar is saying to Job that God's judgment falls hard on the wicked. And of course, one of these days, at the end of time, you and I know that the judgment of Almighty God will reign upon this earth in the latter days of that tribulation period of time. But here, these friends have gotten together, and in their own lack of wisdom, in their own lack of knowledge, in their own lack of truthfulness, they come against Job and they begin to shoot their arrows at him. And they falsely begin to accuse him. And Job, you're the one that's got the problem. Job, you're the one that's sinned. Job, you're the reason all of these things have come upon you. But there's just one major problem with Zophar's messages. His messages are wrong when you interpret them as he intends. Job will soon point out the error of Zophar's analysis. But first, let's be sure we track the man's thinking. In Job 20, verses 4 through 5. We see, do you know this form of old from the establishment of man on earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the godless momentary? Notice, do you know this from of old, from the establishment of man on earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the godless momentary? Zophar sees Job as being the one that's wicked. Therefore, he believes it is his responsibility to straighten Job out and let him know that Job is not long for this world. Look at verses 6 through 11. Though his loftiness reaches the heavens and his head touches the cloud, he perishes forever like his refuse. Those who have seen him will say, where is he? He flies away like a dream and they cannot find him. Even like a vision of the night, he's chased away. The eye which saw him sees him no longer, and his place no longer beholds him. His sons favor the poor, and his hands give back his wealth. His bones are full of his youthful vigor, but it lies down with him in the dust. And there, Zophar, what he's implying is that Job's life is twisted, and it's weird, and then all of a sudden, you're just gone. People won't be able to find you because the wicked, Zophar is saying, doesn't stick around. God removes them. Now, when Zophar refers to his youthful bones lying down with him in the dust, he's not talking about natural causes. He's saying that the reason that Job will die, it's due to God's judgment. He's saying, in effect, because you've lived and like you've lived, because you've kept your secret sins from all of us, letting us think you were righteous, judgment will soon come upon you. And all of that was cruel to Job. He's saying to Job, you will die sooner than you think. And then Zophar comes to verses 12 through 19, and he hits Job even harder. he says in verse 12, though evil is sweet in his mouth and he hides it under his tongue, though he desires it and will not let it go, but holds it in his mouth, yet his food in his stomach is changed to the venom of cobras within him. He swallows riches, but will vomit them up. God will expel them from his belly. He sucks the poison of cobras. The viper's tongue slays him. He does not look at the streams, the rivers flowing with honey and curds. He returns what he's attained and cannot swallow it. As to the riches of his trading, he cannot even enjoy them. For he has oppressed and forsaken the poor. He seized a house which he has not built. Zophar's accusations there in those verses to Job, they're insulting, they're condemning. He accuses Job of taking an unfair advantage of others because of Job's wealth. Zophar is saying, Job, because you had so much wealth, that you took advantage of other people. And he implies that Job used his wealth to exploit and oppress the poor by pushing them out of their houses and seizing their property. All of this is to say, your pleasures are over, Job. Your wickedness has finally caught up with you. And then we see Zophar's words best paraphrased in the Message, and I'll close with this aspect this evening. In Job chapter 20, verse 20 to 29, from Eugene Peterson's The Message, the paraphrase there. Such God-denying people are never content with what they have or who they are. Their greed drives them relentlessly. They plunder everything, but they can't hold on to any of it. Just when they think they have it all, disaster strikes. They're served up a plate full of misery. When they're filled their bellies with that, God gives them a taste of their anger, and they get to chew on that for a while. As they run for their lives from one disaster, they run smack into another. They've knocked around from pillar to post, beaten to within an inch of their lives. They're trapped in a house of horrors and see their loot disappear down a black hole. Their lives are a total loss. Not a penny to their name, not so much as a bean. God will strip them of their sin-soaked clothes and hang their dirty laundry out for all to see. Life is a complete wipeout for them, nothing surviving God's wrath there. That's God's blueprint for the wicked, what they have to look forward to. And so Zophar speaks all of those things to Job. One commentary on Job says this: this is the last time we hear from Zophar, and we will not miss him. I like that. Have you ever known? Have you ever had a Zophar in your life? They say they want to demoralize you and they want to ride off, then into the sunset, never to return again. Our response to those kind of people is good riddance. I don't need you in my life. And so tonight we will pick up with Zophar's approach and how all of that is applied as we come back on Wednesday evening. Would you stand with me as we pray together tonight?